Thank you, Johnny. Johnny called me last night. As most of you know, my mom passed away last Wednesday. And so he said he knew it was going to be an emotional day today. And he said, I want to stand with you today when you talk to your mother, talk about your mother and your baseball, and give you my support. So, Johnny, I appreciate it very, very much. Friends. And I've heard several people talk about, we've played together all these years. We know most of these guys since we were 10 years old. We started off 8, 10 years old together, so we've gone on for 50, 55 years together. So it's not, we just didn't play ball together. We're friends together. We're brothers together, and we're just as close as family. And it's what my mother always said. All these, boys, there's 3 of us in the family, my brother and sister. But Mom had another 50, 60 other kids, because every boy here was part of our family. Adopted them completely, took care of them, raised them. Steve Himlet's mother here, seeing her is just a blessing to be able to see her be here today, because my mother was just like Mrs. Himlet. Back in one year, in 1963, I think it was, in Little League down here on 22nd Street, we played, there's one game every night, Monday through Thursday, and there was 4 games on Saturday. And of course, my team played once during the week and once on Saturday. Well, she was there for every game that year. She went to watch Tim play, Johnny Mullins play, Dave Staten play, Bobby Eisen play. She rooted for everybody. It wasn't just me. She was the mom's mom, if you will. So, but first of all, next of all, I want to thank Mark and the committee very much for, even considering me for nomination, and I appreciate it very much. Also thank Gary Wright and David Carter, who got this Hall of Fame started, and really got a great thing happening to recognize all these folks. None of us got to where we are on our own. We all had somebody get us started, and I've heard just about every player here mention their parents. Their moms, their dads sort of got them started to go through it. Of course, my family's no exception. I can remember, in the afternoons, my dad got off work. He worked at Armco Steel. He'd come home, he'd take his hard hat off. He left his steel-toed shoes on because he knew we didn't have the best control in the world. He'd reach up on the closet shelf, grab the catcher's mitt, grab the baseball glove, throw it to me. Marked off 60 feet, 6 inches out in the middle of the street. He got over on the basketball court we had, and I was out there this morning, walking it off in the middle of the street this morning just to see what it was. My wife walked out and smiled, and we shed a few tears thinking about it. And every afternoon we'd go out there and we'd throw. Now, Dad was a real mild-mannered person. Didn't say a whole lot. He came to all the games, sit right out here in the bleachers. Never sit with my mother. My mother was sort of the opposite. She'd have probably been your arch rival. Talking about the umpires, there wasn't a call that went on that wasn't challenged somewhere along the way, not just my mother, but several others. But I'll talk about your dad in just a moment, though, because I really did like him. But anyway, Dad would do that. But he also said, you're playing the game. Let your play speak for you. You don't need to showboat. You don't need to act up on the field or off the field. And he always said, you don't need to look any further than Billy and Bobby Lynch to see how to behave. He could have said that about all these guys right here, all the people we played with. We all had a good time. We played hard, but everybody behaved themselves. I never recall anybody getting thrown out of the game. Somewhere along the way it may have happened. Somebody may have gotten upset, challenged something, but everybody got along. Nobody argued, nobody fought. I think Tim said it best a while ago. It was a perfect storm that came along. Just a group of guys that got together all at one time when we played. So my sister Susie, who's here today also, most of you know her. Probably more people know Susie in Ashland than know my brother Kenny and myself. She's been around here, and she attends all these events over the years with my mother. And, we live in Birmingham, so we're not up here very often. But back when it wasn't cool, probably when I played t-ball with John Thomas my very first year, back when I was 7, I think you were 9 that first year. And so Susie, teenager back in those years, probably wasn't cool to come to your little brother's games, but she always did. Even when I went off to college, she still found ways to come to watch me play basketball or baseball, which was greatly appreciated. And my brother Kenny here, he's 4 years older than I am, but he always let me play with his friends. And so when they play basketball on the court at the house, or play baseball, or get back in the alley behind the house and play rundown or wiffle ball or whatever we did, Kenny always included me in all that. And in the state basketball tournament in '69, we're playing in the first round, we're playing Harlan, Kentucky. There's about 45 seconds to go in the game, and I'm at the foul line getting ready to shoot a free throw. There's 18, 20,000 people in that place, and I hear one voice holler out. And he said, "Hit him, Bo." As far as I knew, Kenny thought he was stationed in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. Didn't know he was even in the state, but he was there. As soon as the game ended, the first person to come hug me. In the 1-0 game that Tim Huff pitched so well against Don Gullett in Moorhead, Kenny was driving up there to see us play, but he knew he wouldn't get there in time for that game. He was coming for the next game. And other than Tim, he may be the only other person that we're going to win that game that day. But we were all sure, supporting Tim, we were going to be able to do it. Toughest part I want to talk about is my mother. Because, last week she passed away last Wednesday. I was able to give the eulogy on her service Saturday, rather emotional to go through. And I thought today would be even more emotional. But I've got peace with it. We all have peace with it, with all my friends here, and particularly with Johnny stepping up to help me out. It's really great. Got good friendships along the way. When Bobby first called me and said, you're going to be inducted into the CP1 Hall of Fame, well, first of all, I was just shocked. And then I was very humbled by it because I knew all these other guys. And I said, well, they're very deserving. And, I sort of came along as a drag along maybe a little bit. If you go back into those days, Tim played first base, David Staten was second base, Bobby Ison was shortstop, Fred Lively was third base. I had nowhere to play. So, and it went like that all through Little League, all through Babe Ruth League, all through high school, even when I went off to college. So, but what Jim Stewart started me off doing was whoever pitched, I got to play their position. So I got to play every day. So I was not good enough to beat anybody out, but I was usually second best at all those positions. So that sort of drugged me along, helped me quite a bit to do that. And I know how much Mom wanted to be here today. In fact, when I called and told her, right after Bobby had called, I called my wife, Jeannie, first and told her. And after I sort of got composed a little bit, I called my mother and sister to tell them. And Mom was not in very good health then, but this was back in maybe March or April. And she said, I'll be there. Well, little did I know that she and Dad had the bird's eye seat, front row. They got the best seats in the house again. So I feel certain that they're here today to see this. And Billy, thank you so much for honoring her a little while ago. And Mark Maynard article that he wrote earlier, or I guess last week, if you haven't read it, I encourage you to go read it. It really warmed our hearts, and thank you so much. We really did appreciate that. It was just a great piece. In 1963, our Little League team came within one game of the Little League World Series. I was the alternate on the team. I wasn't on the team. I was the first alternate for it. We played up in Norfolk, Virginia, and we lost to a team from Texas. Well, they got on a plane and flew to Williamsport to go to the Little League World Series, and we got on a bus and drove back to Ashland. It's about a 12-hour bus ride. From that day forward, we lost as a team from Houston, Texas that beat us. From that day forward, my mother never rooted for a team from Texas again, and that went on forever. And she always loved watching the Little League World Series on TV, and College World Series on TV. So ironically, last week, she passed away Wednesday, but Monday and Tuesday were a lot of Little League games on, and she sat glued to the TV those 2 days and got to watch the Little League ball games play. In fact, the first time I ever played a ball game in my life, my parents or brother or sister was not present, was my first college basketball game. And I was playing against Birmingham Southern in Birmingham, Alabama, and it was quite different. You walk out on the court of the field for the first time and nobody's there, and it took a little to get used to. I also want to mention some of the coaches that I had over the years. First year I played with John Thomas, as I mentioned. A guy named Bill Curry was our coach that year. We actually won the city championship that year. And John, I brought something to remind you of that. As I heard Steve Gilmore and David Carter talk before in some of their speeches they've given about how they got their first Little League uniform and they slept in it that night and loved it so much. Well, John, here's our first game we had. We played T-ball that year, and I've had it all this time. So this was priceless, John. Of course, when John wore this, he looked like Ted Blazewski. He had the big muscular arms back then and could knock the ball a country mile, which he always did, and that's the reason we won the city championship, was because of John. It was quite a treat. But the other coaches I had, you heard a few of them mention Jim Stewart, who was probably the most instrumental coach that we all had over the years. He coached me in Little League, then the Little League All-Stars, Babe Ruth League. He coached a little bit American Legion ball. He coached us, and he was really just a super coach for us. But we had several others. Johnny Mullins mentioned David Webb a while ago. David Webb and Bill Tackett, I think, coached our 13-year-old All-Star team the year we won the state. Don Blanton, Shorty Blanton, Cliff Webb was so instrumental with the post-76 American Legion teams. Bill Workman, David Webb, as I've already mentioned. My college baseball coach at Millsaps College was Tommy Raniker. And I played for Marshall's team one summer, and after the Industrial League up there, we had a team from Ashland that had formed, and we dropped out, so they asked me to play for them, and we went all the way to the American Baseball Congress World Series that year and played up in Chicago, and we lost out in the second or third round, I guess, but it was a great experience to play with him. And then I got a real experience to play in Jackson, Mississippi after my senior year in college for two fellows named Charles McElroy and Charles Robertson. It was a semi-pro team, and it turned out they called me one day and asked me to come play for them. And I said, well, okay, where are we going to practice? And they said, we're going to practice at Jackson State. Well, as most of you know, Jackson State is a predominantly black school. So I go over to get ready to practice that day, and the guy walks up and says, you must be Bo Carter. And I said, why? He said, you're the only white guy within 4 or 5 miles of here. It's the greatest experience in the world. Because I know back in the first CP1 class, Reese Banks was inducted because he basically broke the color barrier here. And then Mike Johnson and Charlie Jackson went through some times and tribulations when we were in Little League that they weren't treated fairly. But I tell you, they greeted me with open arms, brought me in, played ball with those guys, the greatest experience in the world. And we got to play in a lot of unique places. We got to go to Birmingham to play in the old Birmingham Barons ballpark, which is the oldest active park still in America. It's older than Fenway Park, it's older than Wrigley Field. We got to play at Tiger Stadium, which is north of Jackson, Mississippi a little bit. It's an old field where the Homestead Grays used to play and the old Negro Leagues used to play. Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Willie McCovey, players like that. Satchel Paige got to play there. So I was blessed to be able to play in that stadium for that summer particularly. I'd also like to sort of touch on all the people here that have been inducted, because I was really blessed to be involved in this class. I knew most of them or played with a lot of them. The ones I didn't know was Mike and Kevin Gothard, who I got to meet today a little bit, and appreciate them. And again, another catcher and another second baseman. It seems like it's predominant as they are. They're both very, very, very well known and great ball players. And then J.D. Broom, and I'll tell a story about Holy Family in a minute to sort of brighten your day up just a little bit. Appreciate that. And Jim Speaks, I've always heard, was the hardest thrower there was and the ace of the staff every year he ever played. But to start off, let me talk about John just a little bit. John Thomas, we played t-ball together, and he was pretty much the size he is now, and he was 9 years old. So playing t-ball at 9 years old is pretty good. He knocked the cover off the ball, and we usually won all of our games. And Tim Huff, he's probably in this area. It's hard to be considered the top pitcher in this area, but he's one of the very top pitchers in this area because it's hard to compete with the other guys. But Tim was right along with him. Think about Tim, he had the best pickoff move of anybody anywhere around. He asked me about 3 or 4 years ago at a baseball function, and I think I offended him when I answered it, because I always played first base when he pitched. And he said, did you know when I was going to throw the ball over to first base? And I said about half the time. Well, he hung his head and sort of stormed off, and he didn't let me finish. I knew about half the time when he did his mediocre throw over there. When Tim put his best move on, there was no way you knew the ball was coming to first base. We were playing up in Huntington one night in the Industrial League up there, and I think we're actually playing a team, the Ashland Merchants from Ashland, I believe. So we were 16 or 17, and they were all 19, 20, 21 years old. And the guy gets on first base, and Tim throws over and picks this guy off. And about 3 innings later, same guy got on first base. And he ventured off just a few extra feet and smiled a little bit. In a few seconds, Tim picks him off. So about the 7th inning, this guy, same guy, is on base for the 3rd straight time. And he tells me, he says, I'm not going to get picked off this time. I'm not going to get picked off. And he moves about 2 feet off the base. Tim throws over, we pick him off. He crawls off the field. Now, Tim, do you want to say who that was sitting over here? The most amazing thing about the night, though, it wasn't the fact that Tim picked the same guy all 3 times, was how did anybody get on base 3 times in the same game against Tim Huff? Usually maybe there were 3 runners in the entire game, but it was never the same guy. And then Johnny Mullins over here is probably the best athlete I've ever played with in all my life in anything. He was just super in all sports. He could run fast, throw hard, hit the ball. He did everything exactly great, all out all the time. Kind of a carefree attitude, if you will, but super ball player. Joe Conley, I played with Joe several times. Of course, he's in the state tournament my junior year. His senior year, Joe made All-State. what did you get, 8 hits in the three games, something like that. He really helped carry the team. Joe was a very, very clutch hitter. And somebody said a while ago he was a heady player, very, very smart player. And he was. He knew how to position himself. He may not be the fastest runner in the world. He could probably beat me because I wasn't very fast either. But Joe knew how to play. And he was a very, very strong competitor, put everything into the game. Later on, when Joe became an umpire, he umpired one of the college leagues in the Southeast in Birmingham, Sanford College, Sanford University. And when he would come to Birmingham, he and the other umpire would come and stay with us at our house. And so one Friday afternoon, he's umpiring at Sanford University, and it was a hot day. It was in the spring, but still a fairly warm day. So I left work a little early that day, and I have a coat and tie on. I go and I sit in the stands, and everybody else is up there rooting for Sanford. And somebody asked me, "Who are you here to see? Who are you watching?" And I said, "Well, I'm friends with the umpire." Well, about that time, and Joe wasn't the one that did it, because the other umpire made a pretty bad call. Well, now they start screaming. So then Joe gets control of the game, as he should have. And then about an inning later, Joe throws the Sanford coach out of the game. So when we leave that day, you know, I'm walking out with him to the car. Well, actually, we're running to the car at that point. But Joe was a very, very good umpire. He knew the rules and regulations and really did a great job of doing that. Steve Hamlet was you all heard Terry say a while ago, a great catcher. Absolutely great. I was pleased today that there are 3 catchers, because that's what Ashland should be famous for besides his pitching staff. He was always fun to pitch to, very relaxed, very laid back. He got into a game that was a little bit tense. He'd just walk out to the mound, that little smile on his face, as we all would recognize. You know, he didn't run very fast. He'd walk out to the mound, little smile on his face, and say, "All you got to do is throw it to me. Don't worry about what to throw. I'll call the pitches. You throw it. We'll get them out. Everything will be okay." And that's the way Steve always was. But I also want to mention at the same time, and Tim mentioned David Dameron a while ago, the other catchers we had was Mike Johnson, Jackie Daniel, and Phil Davison were the catchers I always had. And I didn't realize how lucky I was till I got off to college. And the college catchers I had, none of them could hold a candle to any of those guys. I mean, Ashland was blessed. We as pitchers were blessed to have the catchers such as that. Dale Griffiths as an umpire, when he walked out onto this field, it was like he walked out into Yankee Stadium. He was always professional. You mentioned the start search, the patches on his uniform, the whole works. He umpired a game as if it was the Yankees and Red Sox in 7th game of the World Series, and that's the way he umpired it. He did allow you to question a call occasionally, but you didn't want to question too many. But he'd let you know if it was high, it was outside, inside, and then it was over with, and that was it. And I always respected him, and don't ever recall any incidents with him, because he had total control of the game. He did a great job, and thank you very much for being here to represent him. Nard Pergram's daughter was a cheerleader when I was a senior in high school, so I got to know Narda very well. And the thing I remember most about Nard, and I think J.D. mentioned it a while ago, when Joe Franklin was killed in a car accident, Nard wrote the most beautiful poem you've ever heard about Joe Franklin. And we were all very fortunate for Nard to do that. He was just a fine man, a fine gentleman, and really appreciated him quite a bit. Mike Smith sort of continued and set the standard for second basemen along the way. Kevin came along and followed it up. We had David Staten in our era, who will probably be standing up here in the next year or so to continue that tradition. And then I mentioned Kevin and Mike and Jim and J.D. already, but the one thing about Holy Family I want to say about it, in 1968, the Tomcats had won 2 straight state championships already, and we're opening day. We're over here in the first base dugout where it's cold and snowy and wind blowing and freezing to death. And they're over here, and I guess the sun was shining, and it was warm, and it wasn't cloudy for those guys, because they beat our brains out 14-4, opening game. First game, and I thought, boy, this is going to be a tough season already. The next day, John and David Breslin's mother, who was just a wonderful woman, we all knew them from Little League years, she wrote a poem, and Mike Relford, I guess, put it in the newspaper, Mark, back in those days, and it was pretty centered in the middle of the paper. I can't remember the exact word of all the poem, but it ended up with, "Oh, how the mighty have fallen from number 1 in the state to number 2 in the city." So whenever you saw Mrs. Breslin after that, or John or David, they always smiled and talked about it. It was always a great experience. I got to play with so many people over the years. Ricky Dixon, Joe Mantle, Don Delaney, Mike Tackett. Would ask all your prayers for Mike Tackett as he battles cancer down in Houston right now. He's going through a struggle. He's doing fairly well, but everybody please remember him. Charlie Jackson, David Dameron, Jackie Daniel, Phil Davis, and Mike Johnson, Bobby Ison, David Staten, Fred Labby, David Cox, David Jones, and many, many others. All those guys were instrumental as a team to get us where we are today. Again, playing baseball and basketball in Ashland gave me a chance to go to college and experience a lot of opportunities that would never come my way otherwise. I got to attend Millsaps College in Jackson, Mississippi on a baseball scholarship. Got a BA in accounting in '73 and became a CPA and worked in banking the rest of my career. I got to travel around a lot, go to a lot of places I wouldn't normally have gotten to do, so I've been very, very blessed. But it all started basically right down there on 22nd Street, 3 years in Little League, 3 years of Babe Ruth League here, 3 years American Legion ball, a couple of years of Tomcat ball, and just, you know, the city of Ashland, such a wonderful and great place to be. But in closing, I want to leave you with one thought. My wife, Jeannie, is here with me today from Birmingham, and she shared this with me a few months ago, and I've shared it a few other times when I've spoken. It says, the people we surround ourselves with either raise or lower our standards. They either help us to become the best version of ourselves or encourage us to become lesser versions of ourselves. We become like our friends. No man becomes great on his own. No woman becomes great on her own. The people around them make them great. We all need people in our lives who raise our standards, remind us of our essential purpose, and challenge us to become the best versions of ourselves. In other words, you're known by the company you keep. And I know here in Ashland, Kentucky, that I am in very, very good company. Thank you all very much.